Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to kind of help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about the influence of culture. Certainly, culture influences how we see the world. And this time we're going to start up on fearfulness. My childhood was a time of unvoiced fears, writes Isabel Allende. Fear of her family's tyrannical maid, fear that her mother would die and her father would come back to claim her, fear of the devil, fear of her sadistic uncles, fear of gypsies, and fear of what real bad men can do to little girls. So clearly her life was filled with fear. And this may have been a way her mother kept her under control. We don't know. We weren't there. But it's a shame when a child grows up that fearful, because then they're not going to be outgoing. They're not going to do, their best in life if they're fearful. So some people use that type of fear to control their children, but that is detrimental to the child's psyche, and you shouldn't do it. You can explain things in a way where the child can understand it without controlling them by fear. Families in trouble, child abuse and neglect. And this happens a lot more. 1 in 3 families have some type of abuse or neglect happening in the home. People don't want to believe that. They want to sweep it under the rug, keep the closet door closed, whatever. But it's a fact. I've studied enough statistics and analysis to know that's a fact. Although most parents are loving and nurturing, some cannot or will not take proper care of their children, and some deliberately hurt or kill them. Maltreatment by parents or others is deliberate or avoidable endangerment of a child. Mistreatment takes several forms. Any one form is likely to be accompanied by one or more of the others, because, you're not just going to do one form of abuse on your child if you're abusing your child. There's going to be other forms of abuse and neglect that's happening. In general, abuse refers to action that inflicts harm. Neglect refers to inaction or only occasional care, which can lead to harm. Physical abuse involves injury to the body through punching, beating, kicking, or burning. Neglect is failure to meet a child's basic physical, emotional, or educational needs. Sexual abuse is sexual activity involving a child and another person. Emotional maltreatment includes acts of abuse or neglect that may cause behavioral, cognitive, emotional, or mental disorders. It may include rejection, terrorization, isolation, exploitation, degradation, ridicule, or failure to provide emotional support, love, and affection. Emotional maltreatment is hard to identify. Its effects may not surface immediately and may be difficult to distinguish from signs of emotional disturbance and other developmental problems, like basic depression. Maltreatment, facts and figures. How common is maltreatment? It is hard to say. Many, if not most, cases, like the rough games Isabel Allende's uncles played with her and her brother, are never reported to agencies. And many of those reported are not investigated. Because, unfortunately, people don't always believe the child. Because they say kids lie. Well, you know what? Kids lie to keep themselves out of trouble. Rarely is a child going to lie and say somebody did something to them, unless another person, like in a custody case, mom said tell them dad this, dad said tell mom did this. That is usually the only time the children lie about that. Children carry the burden of being abused to the point where finally, if someone even hints at an ask, they will blurt it. They will spill it because they don't understand it, and They just want to be happy and loved, and that's what every child wants. So if a child tells you they're being mistreated, listen to them and take some action. On the other hand, some reported claims filed in the context of divorce proceedings, there we go, are false. Excuse me. The steep rise in reported cases and serious injuries since 1976, when the first national statistics were compiled, may reflect an increase in maltreatment, an increase in reporting, or more likely, both of those. Because there were people, when I was 8, I told my mother and grandma that they didn't believe me. They grilled me for an hour until I relented and said, no, it happened to some girl I went to school with. There was a teacher in middle school who had made a comment, and I told her, she said, I know you want me to get involved, but I'm not going to get involved because kids lie, and I don't know whether you're telling the truth or not. So, get involved, people. If a kid tells you something like that, believe them. Contributing factors and ecological view. Maltreatment by parents is a symptom of extreme disturbance in child rearing, usually aggravated by other problems, such as poverty, alcoholism, or antisocial behavior. A disproportionate number of abused and neglected children are in large, poor, or single-parent families, which often are under stress. They may live in crowded conditions in high-risk neighborhoods, and many move frequently. Yet, what pushes one parent over the edge, another may take in stride. Although most neglect cases occur in very poor families, most low-income parents do not neglect their children. Abuse and neglect reflect the interplay of many contributing factors involving the family and the neighborhood community. Because I know there were kids who ran our streets in the neighborhood. Now, we got to go out and play and do stuff like that, but we didn't run the streets. And I know there were kids who went into homes where things happened to them they shouldn't have. And in our city, there was a little boy who was killed because his family just let him wander the street. And he got into a pedophile's home. The pedophile did things to him. And the little boy was hurt. And so the pedophile decided the only recourse he had was to kill the little boy, and he put him in a dumpster down the road. So this child lost his life because the parents were not watching him like they should have been. And that's a shame that that child had to die. But in my opinion, well, let's just put it nicely as I can. None of my 4-year-olds were running the neighborhood. None of my 4-year-olds were going to neighbors' houses without my consent or their consent and wandering the streets. Just saying. Characteristics of abusive families. Abuse may begin when a parent who is already anxious, depressed, or hostile tries to control a child physically but loses self-control and ends up shaking or beating the child, which is never okay. When parents who are emotionally fragile have children who are particularly needy or unresponsive, the likelihood of maltreatment increases. Characteristics of neglected families, or neglectful families. Neglectful parents tend to be apathetic, incompetent, irresponsible, or emotionally withdrawn. The family atmosphere tends to be chaotic, with people moving in and out. Neighborhood and social support. And this is something that we can all provide, you know. The outside world can create a climate for family violence. What makes one low-income neighborhood a place where children are highly likely to be maltreated, while another, marched for ethnic population and income levels, is safer matched. Gosh, some of these pages are wrinkly. Excuse me. And the easy answer to that is the people. If you have a lot of antisocial, abusive people in an area, then chances are more likely that that's the kind of people who are also living there raising their children. Neighborhoods change, and if it becomes too bad of a neighborhood, you can always try and find another one. Now, that's not always in your budget or whatever, but sometimes you have to look for your own support system. Effects of maltreatment. Maltreatment can produce grave consequences: physical, cognitive, emotional, and social. Neglected children tend to grow poorly and often have medical problems. Maltreated children often show language delays. They often do poorly on cognitive tests and in school and show problem behavior. Maltreated children often have disorganized or disoriented attachments and negative, distorted self-concepts. They do not develop social skills, and because they act aggressively. At the end of the page, there's a little wrinkle here. Tend to be rejected by peers. Price found that chronic neglect in early childhood can have negative effects on school performance, social relationships, adaptability, and problem solving. So when you're neglecting your child, you're not just not taking care of them in that moment because you're too busy or you're too stressed or whatever. You're affecting them for the rest of their life if this becomes a pattern. So, if you have a kid, that is your job to take care of that child and not neglect that child. Maltreated children may become either overly aggressive or withdrawn. Physically abused youngsters tend to be fearful, uncooperative, less able to respond appropriately to friendly overtures, and consequently unpopular. Neglected children tend to lack enthusiasm, creativity, and self-esteem, and tend to be angry and dependent. Although most abused children do not become delinquent, criminal, or mentally ill, abuse makes it likely that they will. Neglected children, too, often become delinquents and adult criminals. Teenagers who were abused when they were younger may run away, which may be self-protective, or may abuse drugs, which is not. Consequences of sexual abuse vary with age. Sexually abused children may become sexually active at an early age. And now we're going to talk about developmentally related reactions to sexual abuse. We're going to talk about the age and the most common symptoms. In preschoolers, most common symptoms are anxiety, nightmares, inappropriate sexual behavior. In school-age children, the most common symptoms are fear, mental illness, aggression, nightmares, school problems, hyperactivity, regression behavior. Excuse me. Ugh. And in adolescence, depression, withdrawn, suicidal, or self-injurious behaviors like the cutters. You know, you might tease about people like that, call them emo or whatever. But there's a reason they do that. There's a reason they do that. That is a cry for help. And, you know, instead of insulting them or making fun of them, you can help them. You can step in and say, hey, what's going on? I want to know. Is there anything I can do to help? Physical complaints, illegal acts, running away, and substance abuse, because that's an escape. They're trying to escape their life, you know, because what's happened to them is pretty freaking horrible, and they want to escape. Fearfulness and low self-esteem often continue into adulthood. Adults who were sexually abused as children tend to be anxious, excuse me, depressed, angry, hostile, or mistrustful, to feel isolated and stigmatized, to be sexually maladjusted. Emotional maltreatment is more subtle than physical maltreatment. It has been linked to lying, stealing, low self-esteem, emotional maladjustment, dependency, underachievement, depression, aggression, learning disorders, homicide, and suicide, as well as psychological distress later in life. Excuse me, my goodness. Not quite as well as I had hoped today. But later in life, sometimes we can remember things that we had repressed while we were younger. Because, you know, I went from one family situation to another when my father remarried my mother. So to be in that safer situation, I pushed all that back. I got rid of it. It went way back to the back of the brain somewhere, and I forgot about it, you know, for a while. Until my brain said, hey, guess what? I want you to remember this little piece of something. I think we're ready to deal with this now. So then I remember a little piece of this. It's like, oh my God. And then once you deal with that, your brain's like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to deal with this. And so those things that it repressed, now it starts bringing up for you later in life. And you have to deal with them, because if you don't, it's going to make you mentally ill. It's it's going to weigh on you. It's going to cause you mental problems. So the best thing to do is deal with it. Still, many maltreated children show remarkable resilience, and that's the case there. One of my psychologists has told me I'm resilient, and that makes all the difference. Especially if they have been able to form an attachment to a supportive person, like my grandmother or my, great aunt. Above average intelligence, advanced cognitive abilities, and high self-esteem seem to help. So, Sorry, nasty but necessary. So, some kids are more able to get over this than others. And it depends on if they had anyone in their life who was supportive, and the coping mechanisms that, naturally occur in their DNA. So some kids can bounce back and some can't. Most abused children do not grow up to abuse their own children. And I've heard statistics on that. It said 50, and it's actually less. And the reason for that is a lot of kids do learn what they live, and they do abuse their children because they feel like you're going to get what I got. And that's just really immature, hurt thinking. But most of us who have been through something like that realize we don't want our children to go through that. That was horrible. And we're trying to protect our children from that. So we're not going to put up with that. Abused children who grow up to be non-abusing parents are likely to have had someone to whom they could turn for help, to have received therapy, my goodness. Excuse me, I ain't quite as well as I had hoped today. And I knew that I needed to do that, so I did. And to have good marital or love relationships. They are likely to have been abused by only one parent, or to have had had at least one loving, supportive relationship with another adult in their circle. And like I said, I credit my grandmother, even though she was married to one of my abusers. When she found out, even though she acted like she didn't quite believe me, but after that, she kept me away from him. She would have me sleep in bed with her, and she would sleep by the door. She would keep me upstairs with her. in the next room. She never allowed him access to me again. So I think she did believe me, but she didn't want to believe me, you know? And unfortunately, that's how it happens in families sometimes. You know, they can believe this is happening, but they don't want to. My goodness, excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. Had to blow my nose. Okay, helping families in trouble or at risk. Since maltreatment is a multifactorial problem and needs many pronged solutions, effective prevention and intervention strategies should be comprehensive, neighborhood based, centered on protecting children, and aimed at strengthening families if possible and removing children if necessary. Some abuse prevention programs teach basic parenting skills. Like I said, we went to the community center and took our parenting classes because I knew we didn't know how to do it. I didn't have the best examples, and I know his parents didn't give him the best examples, so we went to the parenting classes, so we knew what we were doing. Others offer subsidized daycare, volunteer homemakers, home visitors, and temporary respite homes or relief parents to take over occasionally. And I know some people who have actually taken advantage of these things so that, you know, they can have a little break, especially people who have a disabled child. Children are more likely to be abused because of their constant need for care. And, you know, upon occasion, they have taken the child to a respite home to just get a little break. And there's nothing wrong with that if you need a break. If you need a break, you can say, I need a break. Because saying you need a break is better than harming your child. Service for abused children and adults includes shelters, education in parenting skills, and therapy. And that is the whole goal that we had when we started Healing Families' Lives. We were going to have a shelter. Because the one here in our city was always full. They had a backlog on counseling, and they were just not meeting the community's needs. And education and parenting skills, that is a class that I taught. So, you know, that was one of the goals, is teach people how to be parents, how to raise your child, because a lot of people just don't know. And therapy. We had a counselor, we had a psychologist, someone who did testing, we had a neuropsychologist who was, you know, willing to do referrals with us. So we had a great bunch of people lined up to provide services. And like I said, we helped 188 people in the community before we had to call it quits. We just did not have the support, and I was not physically able to continue doing the things that needed to be done for the agency, and we couldn't find people who would take it on, do it right. I'm tired of this. I don't do sick well. And we couldn't even find people whose resumes checked out. So, unfortunately, we had to close. And that's one of the biggest regrets in my life, is that we just could not get people interested enough to offer services that our community really needed. Because the one agency we have, one in a city of the size, you know, we're like the 17th biggest city. We have one agency that people turn to, and it's just not meeting the needs. So that's still a problem. Oh my goodness. Parents Anonymous and other organizations offer free, confidential support groups. Abused children may receive play or art therapy and daycare in a therapeutic environment. In communities where abuse or neglect is widespread, school-based programs can be effective. My goodness. Uh, uh, you know, almost, we can get through this. The adult volunteer uses dolls to help young children realize that they have control over their bodies and need not let anyone, even friends or family members, touch them. And that's something that was taught to my children in school. I was not taught that. What I was taught was, you better do what an adult tells you to do, because if I found out you have not behaved, I'm going to beat your ass. So I was taught that adults are always right, and I'm never right, and they can do what they want to with me. I'm their property. That's what I was taught. Such programs for preventing sexual abuse tend to walk a fine line between alerting children to danger and frightening them, or discouraging appropriate affection. And, at my children's school, they talked about good touch and bad touch. And I thought it was just great, because my children were learning something that could be a great life skill for them, and not put them in positions where I had been put, believing that I was chattel or property, and adults could do whatever they wanted to with me. When authorities remove children from their homes, the usual alternative is foster care, which has increased markedly since the 1980s. Foster care removes a child from immediate danger, but it is often unstable, may also turn out to be an abusive situation, and further alienates the child from the family. My goodness. Maybe should have waited another day, but we're getting through this. We're going to do it. Oh my gosh. It is intended as a temporary emergency measure, but in some cities, the average stay is 5 years, or with a series of placements in different homes. So it is not a fix-all. It's not a good situation. The plight of abused and neglected children is one for which our society needs to find more effective remedies. Without help, maltreated children often grow up with serious problems, at great cost to themselves and to society. And goodness, may continue the cycle of maltreatment when they have children of their own. And like I said, it's not true that it's a 50-50 thing. It's usually not. But like I said, there are ignorant people, or very mentally disturbed people who have kind of the mindset like, this happened to me, it's going to happen to you. And, they're taking their frustrations out on their own kids. But most people, have the presence of mind to say, I'm not going to let my kid grow up that way. I'm not going to let this happen to my kid. So, relationships with other children. Although the most important people in young children's world are the adults who take care of them, relationship with siblings and playmates becomes more important in early childhood. Virtually every characteristic, activity, and personality is goodness sake. Oh my gosh. Try that again. Virtually every characteristic, activity, and personality issue of this age, from gender development to prosocial or aggressive behavior, involves other children. Siblings and peer relationships provide a measuring stick for self-efficacy. Children's growing sense of capability to master challenges and achieve their goals. By competing with and comparing themselves with other children, they can gauge their physical, social, cognitive and linguistic competencies, and gain a more realistic sense of self. So I'm going to stop you there. So if you did not have a great sense of self, if you had problems, with other children, there might have been a reason for that. And only you know that. And that's something that you can work on, So I'm going to leave you there, and hopefully that'll help you figure out maybe a little bit more of why you do what you do. Until next time.